The AIME established the societies in 1957, and it's kind of a little bit stranger, lack of a better word, cute. I mean, there was the Society of Mining Engineers, there was the Society of Petroleum Engineers, and then there was the Metallurgical Society. And they all had to have 3 initials. So they renamed it the Metallurgical Society, so it was TMS, SMESPE, and it just fit, okay? So that's how it got the T, and everybody asked me that question for years. Well, what's the T stand for? It's the, and so on. So so that's how it evolved, and then I started with them in those capacities. But as I indicated earlier, there always was, TMS at the time, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, had 3 or 4 divisions. Even those divisions were not as compatible as they could have been. And really the bigger one was the Iron and Steel Division, which that eventually, I think in 74 or 75, somewhere in there, I don't remember the exact year, became its own separate society from TMS. And some of that was because the other divisions of TMS were more academic and more research oriented, still are to this day. And the Iron and Steel Group was much more industrial. Yeah. And there wasn't the compatibility in what they met and what they talked about at meetings technologically. And the Iron and Steel Group was very defined, more narrowly defined. And I always like to say that TMS was everything from A to Z, aluminum to zinc, and extremely diversified. Right. And that's a weakness and a great strength. And I think it's a weakness in how you run and organize the organization, right. But it's a strength in good times and bad times when, now, honestly, the Petroleum Society has done extremely well. The Mining Society has had some ups and downs, but done well. Iron and Steel Society has done well overall, AIST now. But when there's a down market in steel, they hurt a little bit with revenue and membership. Where with TMS, if copper was up or some of the extractive industries were down, and then we got involved with some of the new high-tech materials that came into being, it really made a difference in that the society could then sustain some of those little ups and downs better than some of the others could. So in the end, that's how the whole 4 societies kind of evolved into being. And as I said earlier, the move out of New York became more economic driven and image driven.
Yeah, and in TMS, was it just a 1M because they added M's, or was it M's from the beginning?
No. It was 19, I think 89, pretty sure that's it, that we became the Minerals, Metals, and Materials Society. Again, that was to accommodate different groups within the organization, that the minerals was to be the more extractive side that related to the Mining Society, and the metals was some of the more functional metal areas, if you call functional areas, and the materials side of it was where the society saw potential growth. And materials became, and I'm going to use the expression probably a few times, if I jump ahead, I'm sorry. No, we kind of TMS mirrored different things within the profession and within the industry. The materials advent in the name, I think kind of mirrored what was happening at universities. Metallurgical engineering departments are becoming materials science and engineering departments. And they kind of led the way. Yeah. And because we have a high % of professors and academicians in TMS, they wanted that to be recognized in their professional society's name. So it just was obvious. And it wasn't without some pain and some study and some whatever, but the name was changed, and it's kind of like blah, 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 but and people still stumble over it a little bit, but I think it makes sense, and it probably has stood the society. It probably has stood it it stood up well in it being able to grow and evolve the way it has.
And it's probably no coincidence that it's 1973 that you're joining the TMS, and there's this recognition of this need for decentralization. This is also a time of crisis in the U.S. and global economy. I imagine that played into it. There's a bit of a down market in a number of the industries, and that affected the relative fortunes of the societies as they went through the 1970s a little bit.
Yes, I would say my recollections are the 70s were certainly at tougher times for the organization. I've already said we went through a relocation from New York City to Pittsburgh. We were going through a change in our name. We were going through changes in our whole divisional structure. I mean, TMS had, I'm trying to think of, I should be able to think of a good psychological term for this. We had sort of well, we didn't know whether we went through a period where we had multiple divisions, then we decided we want to be this homogeneous organization, and the divisions were a problem. We got rid of the divisions. We're just one organization with 35 to 40 technical committees, you know, with no structure that they related to a division structure as we had. Like they were like mini societies. And then after a few years, that didn't work so well, so we said, let's recreate divisions, which we did then in the early 80s, and so on. So those factors in those years, I would say there were a couple of other things that come to mind. The industry in America was changing, and TMS, and you've probably heard this from the other societies when you get into that, the big major corporations were dissolving and breaking up. And so our members, or the people who were joining the society, weren't coming from the big corporations anymore. Our leadership wasn't from the big corporations so much anymore. Much more with smaller companies. That was then impacted in the 80s and 90s, jumping a little bit ahead, but late 80s into the 90s. Again, a reflection with universities. The universities in graduate school, particularly in metals and materials, had an influx of foreign students from outside the U.S. Almost in dominating position. And they were becoming members. So our society was evolving, growing into much more of an international organization. And our members were coming into smaller companies, startup companies, newer companies. And the other companies, the big corporations, they used to, have a career plan for their people. Didn't exist anymore. People had to become more responsible individually for their own career development. And that, I think, was a boon to TMS and a professional society if it responded properly to those needs and what we would be about in trying to assist and help our members, through their career evolution and development. And I think TMS has done a pretty good job of that. Always could be better, but I think it's done a pretty good job of that.